This show contains views on religion that some viewers may find disturbing. Vatican City in Rome is the world's smallest sovereign state. In its long history, it's had its fair share of scandals. But is there any substance to these stories?
The whole of the Vatican and the Catholic Church is full of secrets because of what it's done over the last 2,000 years.
Perhaps surprisingly, many alleged secrets aren't ancient history, but modern.
There are persistent rumours about close links between the Vatican Bank and the Mafia.
Some have alleged that during the Second World War, the Vatican collaborated with the Nazis.
You can find actual documents that show that members of the Vatican helped Nazis escape.
While others have claimed that one of the objectives of the telescope the Vatican operates is to search for extraterrestrial life.
If they believe that Jesus Christ is going to return as an alien, wouldn't they want to use this telescope to try to make contact with him first?
I would like to see a whistleblower come forward and tell the secrets they've been withholding. Then we could properly rewrite history.
The Catholic Church, with over 1 billion followers, is the largest branch of Christianity. And its home is Vatican City, in the center of Rome.
The history of the Vatican began in the 4th century AD when Constantine built the first Christian basilica on the site of what was believed to be the burial place of St. Peter, Jesus' first martyr. Now, as the church gained prestige and funds, they gradually expanded this complex, and by the Renaissance had enough funds and followers to build the beautiful complex with the elaborate buildings that we think of today. So the new basilica, the Sistine Chapel, and the Papal Palace.
But the Vatican has also become a hotbed of conspiracy theories for one simple reason. Securely housed within is the Vatican Apostolic Archive, known until recently as the Vatican Secret Archive. It's said to contain the Catholic Church's most important and potentially controversial documents, including the private papers of every pope stretching back 1,000 years. And due to the closed nature of much of the archive, it's become a source of speculation by historians and conspiracy theorists alike.
The Vatican has to be one of the most secret organizations in the history of the world. It guards its nasty little secrets, of which there are a great many, jealously.
Scholars are allowed limited access to the secret archive, but significantly, all Vatican documents and private papers of the Pope can only be accessed at least 70 years after the end of a Pope's reign. This policy has fueled speculation about their contents.
The Vatican Secret Archives, or Archivum Secretum, actually genuinely only means private archives in Latin. The word secret doesn't really come into it, but there's no doubt that an awful lot of what's in those vaults is most definitely secret. There's 50 miles of shelving, and you're only allowed to see certain parts because there's an awful lot in there in that 50 miles that I believe the Catholic Church doesn't want anyone to find out about.
Perhaps the most infamous source of speculation has been the extent to which the Vatican collaborated with Nazi Germany before, during, and after the Second World War. due to the fact that the Vatican's records from this period of history have until recently remained inaccessible, unfavorable conjecture has been rife.
Pope Pius XII was pontiff during World War II and as such had a great deal of contact with the Nazi leadership as well as the Allied leadership. He officially maintained a position of neutrality, being in the Vatican in the absolute heart of fascist Italy. But there's been great speculation over how much he did and did not appease the Nazis.
Critics have called Pope Pius XII Hitler's Pope. He's been accused of anti-Semitism and ignoring evidence of the Holocaust. One source for such allegations has been Catholic archives from Pius's reign that are located outside of the Vatican itself. And some of the evidence contained within has been incriminating.
I went to the archives of the Santa Maria dell'Anima, which is the Austrian church associated with the Vatican, and there you see the records of a man called Bishop Alois Hudal, Luigi Hudal. He was an Austrian nationalist, loved the Nazis, and you have got there letters written to him by the likes of Franz Stangl. Now, you may not know Franz Stangl, but he's one of the biggest mass murderers of the 20th century because he was the commandant of Treblinka extermination camp and under his time murdered an estimated 850,000 people. And he is writing to a bishop associated with the Vatican saying, please, can you help me get out? If you're being vouched for by a bishop today, that still carries a lot of weight, doesn't it? And so a lot of these Nazis, they would make their way through what was the Third Reich, down over the Alps into Italy, and they would go to Rome, they would knock on the door of Bishop Hudal, and he would give them a Red Cross passport. Then they would take a boat to that most favoured Nazi retirement destination, Argentina.
But while this evidence clearly implicates Bishop Alois Hudal, who did indeed sympathize with the Nazis, it does not prove that such acts were perpetrated by the Vatican itself.
There's this long-standing story that says the Vatican helped Nazis escape after the war. Why? Because a lot of Catholic priests were historically quite sympathetic to Nazism because they saw Nazism as being the only force in the world that could stand up to communism, which they thought represented an existential threat to the Catholic Church. So it was kind of like, you know, my enemy's enemy is my friend. But what you don't have is the Vatican helping, you know, as an entity in itself. And indeed, there were members of the Vatican who called people like Hudal, you know, the swastika bishop, because they associated with Nazism so much.
In actual fact, many historians believe that Pope Pius XII, far from ignoring the Holocaust, in fact secretly undermined the Nazi regime.
As regards the Nazis and the Vatican during the Second World War, number one, the Vatican was in the middle, of course, of a fascist state, who, of course, Mussolini was an ally of Hitler's. I believe that the Pope was very much sitting on the fence because he wanted to protect his Vatican City. But in my opinion, I believe that the Catholics, the Pope and his cardinals were actually helping to save the lives of thousands of Jews by harbouring them, hiding them in their churches, getting them out of the country, either out of Italy, out of other countries, and saving their lives.
There's been great speculation over how much he did and did not appease the Nazis. We know that he did actually a great deal as head of the church to support the Allied cause and to provide relief for many Jews, including hiding prisoners in the Vatican itself and St. Gandalf's castle.
The debate is set to continue, but the Catholic Church is now endeavouring to help historians discover the truth for themselves.
Pope Francis has just made a really exciting announcement that he is going to release 9 years early the archives of Pope Pius XII, whose records may or may not contain evidence damning the Church and how it reacted to the Nazi threat.
With access to the Vatican's wartime archive, historians should have clearer answers. And although it could take researchers years to review and make conclusions from all the newly released materials, the truth will finally become clear. But the extent to which the Vatican was complicit in the acts perpetrated by Nazi Germany is only part of the Church's past about which questions have been raised.
The Vatican are the most powerful and secretive country on the planet. Not only have they dished out the dogma for thousands of years to the faithful, just feeding them fairy tale under the guise of truth, but they are concealing documents and relics that would rewrite history.
Another prominent source of conspiracy theories concerns the Vatican's financial dealings. Historian and author John Dickey is an expert on this secretive world, and in particular, the numerous financial scandals that have been linked to the organization.
So here we are. This is the Vatican City, the Vatican State. I think the frontier is right here. It's the smallest sovereign state in the world, but despite being so tiny in global scale, it wields huge influence, obviously culturally and spiritually, but also financially.
At the center of the Vatican's vast financial interests is the Vatican Bank, which in its current form was founded during World War II by Pope Pius XII.
What's termed the Vatican Bank is actually properly called the Institute for the Works of Religion, and it's a private bank. It's situated within the Vatican, and it's directly accountable to the Pope. Now, it's not the most transparent institution on the planet, it has to be said. So what its wealth is, we're not entirely sure. But given that the Catholic Church has been around for 2,000 years, I think it's fair to say that its assets are going to be considerable.
In fact, the current assets of the Vatican Bank have recently been estimated at significantly more than $5 billion.
The Vatican Bank is not a bank like you and I would know, where they lend money and you can get a mortgage. It houses and distributes money for religious and charitable works around the world. That's its publicly stated mission.
Over time, there has been allegations of corruption at the bank, accusations of ties to the Mafia. And with researchers unable to access the archives, conspiracies are rife.
The interesting thing about the whole story of the Vatican Bank, corruption, it's all mixed up with the Byzantine world of the Mafia and Italian politics. You can't imagine a more conspiratorial society in the world than Italy. The Italians are absolutely obsessed with conspiracy theory, and they always assume, the worst behind any story, and they always assume that everybody is corrupt. They're probably right.
In 1978, the 65-year-old Pope John Paul I mysteriously and suddenly died just 33 days after he'd been elected. It was reported that he had died naturally of a cardiac arrest. But ever since, conspiracy theories have speculated that, in fact, he was murdered. And such theories focus on the Vatican Bank itself.
Pope John Paul I allegedly died of a heart attack, but the problem is that he was big time trying to reform the Vatican.
The alleged murder of Pope John Paul I in 1978 subsequently inspired the plotline of the famous film Godfather 3. But some claim the film is far more factually accurate than it may appear.
At the centre of the movie is this idea of the Mafia and the Vatican Bank. in league with each other, and a new pope coming in who wants to expose this corruption and then dies.
One theory claims that Pope John Paul I was murdered because he was planning to expose the criminal business practices between the Vatican Bank, Banco Ambrosiano, and the Mafia. Other even more sensational allegations have been made against the Archbishop Marcinkus, the American head of the Vatican Bank at the time of the Pope's death.
In the best-selling 1980s book In God's Name by David Yallop, which covered the conspiracy theories around the death of John Paul I, Marcinkus was heavily implicated as being complicit in that crime.
These remarkable allegations have recently been corroborated by a cousin of Archbishop Marcinkus, US mobster Anthony Raimondi, the nephew of infamous Mafia gangster Lucky Luciano. In 2019, Raimondi confessed that in 1978 he traveled to the Vatican to help his cousin, the Archbishop, poison John Paul I with cyanide in order to prevent the Pope from exposing the Vatican Bank's billion-dollar financial scam. Unsurprisingly, the Vatican vehemently denies that Pope John Paul I was murdered. But what is the truth? Perhaps John Paul I's private papers will contain decisive new evidence. But as the Vatican waits 70 years after a pope's reign before opening up their secret archive, the definitive truth, if it finally comes, won't be revealed until 2048.
I'm sure that there's some really exciting stuff in the secret archive. And which historian wouldn't want to have the key to it? You know, God, I would. I would bet my, sell my house and my entire family twice if I could get the key to the secret archive of the Vatican, but I'm never going to get it.
But the conspiracies don't end there. 4 years later, some of the very same players accused of being involved in the Pope's murder would allegedly go on to perpetrate the very public death of a financier so closely linked to the Vatican. He was known as God's banker. Historian John Dickey is in Rome to investigate this enduring mystery.
Roberto Calvi was an Italian banker, head of his bank, the Banco Ambrosiano. And in June 1982, he was found hanging by his neck under Blackfriars Bridge in London. And we still don't know whether he was murdered or whether he committed suicide. Everybody has their theories. But his story is a conspiracy theorist's dream. It's got all the ingredients. You've got political corruption, high finance, mafia money, and then, of course, last but not least, the Catholic Church.
Initially, Roberto Calvi's death was accepted by the British police as suicide. But when other investigators and journalists started looking into the case, suspicions began to emerge.
Calvi's body was discovered hanging from a rope from Blackfriars Bridge with bricks stuffed in his pocket. But what doesn't add up here is that there were no scuff marks on his body that, you would have seen him clambering up, absolutely no brick dust on his hands. And most damning, it is possible to reconstruct the tide of the time he was discovered and realize that a boat could have pulled up right at the foot of Blackfriars and hung him up in a seeming suicide scene. One theory about why Robert Calvi died is that he was really in the pocket of both the Vatican Bank on the one hand and the mob on the other, and that perhaps he got squeezed between them in a deal gone bad.
If Roberto Calvi's death was murder rather than suicide, then who killed him? The Mafia has always been the prime suspect, but over the years, conspiracy theories have raged that the Vatican was also involved.
Banco Ambrosiano not only had contacts with the Mafia, but also the Vatican Bank owned a stake in Banco Ambrosiano. So in no time at all the headlines around the world were saying God's banker had been murdered in some dirty Vatican financing story. No one's ever been convicted for the murder, although 5 Mafia men were tried in Rome and acquitted. But suspicion has always remained that the Vatican was somehow involved.
Roberto Calvi's death remains a mystery to this day. If he didn't commit suicide, then was he killed to stop him from exposing sensational secrets? And if so, who killed him? To find out some possible answers, historian John Dickey is meeting investigative journalist Philip Willan, who has spent years trying to uncover the truth about the Calvi scandal.
Hello, Philip. Very nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
So, Philip, you've looked at the evidence in detail. Was Calvi suicided, as they say in Italian, or did he commit suicide?
I think the first option is most likely. The murder trial in Rome, which I followed, didn't manage to convict people for his murder, but at all levels of the process, they did conclude that he was murdered or suicided, as you say, rather than committing suicide himself. One of the few things that the court, at the various levels of judgment, the assize court, appeal, and then the Court of Cassation, all the courts agreed was that the claims that he laundered mafia money were believable, and that was a fact.
During the official investigation into the death of God's banker, the accounts of Banco Ambrosiano were examined. It was discovered that a huge amount of money, around $1 billion or more, had gone missing before Calvi died.
If mafia bosses or local crime bosses in Rome had entrusted their money to Calvi, and it's missing from the accounts, and sooner or later they would have been wanting to get it back.
As it's a fact that the Vatican and the Banco Ambrosiano were connected with some very dirty financial transactions, and the chairman of the Banco Ambrosiano was found murdered in very strange circumstances, one wonders exactly who had him killed.
Exactly why Roberto Calvi was killed is not known, but many people speculate he was involved in the plot to assassinate Pope John Paul I. Perhaps the same group then turned on Calvi. During the investigation into the death of God's banker, it was also discovered that just before he died, he tried to blackmail high-powered people who might fear being connected to his bank's illegal activities. Should it collapse as a result of its debts, Calvi wanted them to provide him with the missing money. Philip Willan believes that the evidence can only point in one direction.
I do personally think that he was murdered, and I do think that it probably was related to his blackmail attempts. He's desperately trying to save his financial empire, and he's threatening anybody who he thinks he has dirt on, and that includes the Vatican. Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the American head of the Vatican Bank, he writes letters, rather threatening letters, to the Pope himself.
The reason for the attempted blackmail was because, as the Italian courts discovered, a significant amount of mafia money was laundered through the Vatican Bank, Banco Ambrosiano's main shareholder. The key question for investigators was whether the Vatican Bank knew this. Although wrongdoing was never admitted, the Vatican Bank later paid over $200 million to Banco Ambrosiano's creditors, said to be in recognition of the Vatican Bank's moral involvement in the scandal. Another key question was where the missing money went. Conspiracy theorists point to the fact that Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American, was head of the Vatican Bank throughout the 1970s and 80s. At this time, during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the church was being suppressed behind the Iron Curtain, so the interests of the CIA and the Vatican in fighting communism allegedly coincided.
The links aren't there to be seen completely in public. It's just that there are connections which are very damning. It's believed that the Vatican was channeling funds to, for example, the Contras in Nicaragua and Solidarity in Poland through the Banco Ambrosiano.
In return for political protection, it's claimed that the Mafia agreed to provide much of the money.
At that time, the Mafia was a potential ally in the war against communism. It was a conservative organization. It was, in many cases, linked to the Catholic Church, as a lot of Mafia bosses were devout in their own way. The struggle against communism trumped any other consideration, and I think there was an extraordinary amount of flexibility of dealing with people that you disapproved of. You took their money and you used it for a good cause.
In the letters of blackmail Roberto Calvi wrote just before his death, they are said to have threatened to reveal Banco Ambrosiano's many dirty secrets. Could the CIA, the Mafia, and potentially even the Vatican have feared the consequences?
So if we assume that Calvi was murdered, there was a queue of people, effectively, who had an interest in wanting him silenced. We have the Mafia, we have the church hierarchy, we have politics. This whole system, the overlapping systems, we can say, are suddenly all pointed at Calvi.
It does seem that in the cover-up and the failure to investigate, or the inefficiency of the investigation over the years, it does look very much as though powerful forces didn't want anyone to get to the bottom of this mystery, probably because they were implicated in revealing what happened.
Still to this day, the Calvi case remains unsolved. Perhaps hidden inside the Vatican archive, there will be vital evidence that reveals the truth once and for all. Many believe that the archives could reveal that the Church is engaged in more far-out practices. One such curiosity is the state-of-the-art astronomical observatory in Arizona, which is operated by the Vatican. For many, the idea that the Catholic Church could engage in scientific pursuits seems unlikely. It has even been suggested that they are searching the heavens for extraterrestrial life. In actual fact, the Vatican has operated astronomical observatories for centuries. Detailed studies of the movement of the planets and stars began back in the 16th century, when Pope Gregory XIII had the Gregorian Tower built at the Vatican itself in order to more accurately calculate the annual church calendar, such as the date of Easter.
We like things to be black and white, so we've created a diametrical opposition between religion and science. But in fact, that's not historical reality. People question why the Vatican has a telescope and a big observatory. It has done for hundreds of years. The answer is actually very simple. For centuries, the Church was based on a liturgical calendar that the Vatican had to calculate, and that calendar is based on the movement of the heavenly bodies and astronomy.
Since the 1990s, however, the main Vatican observatory has been located not in Italy, but surprisingly, in the United States.
The Vatican long maintained an observatory and telescope in Rome. Now, as Rome grew and light pollution increased, this was no longer a viable place to do the best observations of the night sky. And so the Vatican acquired a location in Arizona and has established an absolutely state-of-the-art observatory out there. And what I kind of think is fun about it is that its code name, in a way, is Lucifer. And that's really just an acronym from the very long, multiple-barreled name of what it does. But I think that shows the Vatican has a little sense of humor to name its telescope Lucifer.
Today, some people question why the Vatican built such a highly advanced, ultra-modern telescope on Arizona's Mount Graham, given the fact that the religious calendar was accurately calculated centuries ago. Could it really be that the Vatican Observatory has a secret agenda?
It's absolutely incredible that the Vatican has got its own telescope, huge telescope, in Arizona. Are they looking for extraterrestrials? Do they believe there are extraterrestrials? The Catholic Church can't believe that there are aliens because they've told us for 2,000 years that we are the only planet in the universe that has life on it. But there are legends that they do believe it.
According to conspiracy theorists, the Vatican Observatory on Mount Graham isn't really interested in using the telescope for astronomical reasons. They're actually looking for incoming UFOs. Josh Peck is an author who makes this highly controversial claim.
You know, I believe that Mount Graham is one of the biggest secrets of the Vatican today. And the reason that I think that is I don't think it's all about just the science. I believe that the Vatican believes that when Jesus returns, he will return as an alien being. And I believe that's really what part of what's going on with the telescope on Mount Graham is all about. If they believe that Jesus Christ is going to return as an alien, wouldn't they want to use this telescope to try to make contact with him first?
It's an astonishing claim that the Vatican believes an alien in a UFO might herald the second coming of Christ. The Jesuit priests who operate the Vatican Observatory, however, say although they are intellectually curious about the nature of God's universe, the telescope is in reality used for far more mainstream astronomical research. As staff astronomer, Father Jean-Baptiste Kekwaya explains.
This is our telescope. Many people, think that religion and science, they don't go together. But that is totally wrong. They go together from the beginning. The church is not against science. Myself, I work on meteors, shooting stars, and asteroid and comet.
Intriguingly, one of Father Kekwaya's main interests is trying to spot potentially dangerous asteroids on a collision course with Earth. If he sees one, its predicted trajectory can be analyzed in the telescope control room.
It's very important. I don't know, if you heard about asteroid destroying, dinosaurs. So it's good to know when actually, one asteroid will hit the Earth and where. What kind of damage actually is going to create.
Although it may seem surprising that Vatican astronomers are carrying out this kind of research, the observatory is well regarded in a wide range of fields of study. As long-time University of Arizona astronomer Chris Impey explains.
The Vatican Observatory, it's made significant contributions to the study of the center of galaxies. Some galaxies are active and have something bizarre going on because of a black hole. Some are not so active, and yet ostensibly the galaxies are built the same way, so what's special about that? So they've done some surveys that relate to that. So they've contributed to, a range of subjects. Nothing at the, foundational level that might merit Nobel Prize or that kind of level of discovery, but it's a major contribution to astronomy knowledge over the years.
However, despite the Vatican Observatory's scientific achievements, many people refuse to believe that the Vatican is simply carrying out scientific research. They suggest that the Church's official research projects are just a cover story.
Officially, the telescope is there to monitor near-Earth objects and monitor the development of galaxies, the movement of stars, and so on. In fact, all the things that observatories usually are there for. But conspiracy theories believe that the Catholic Church is really using it to look out for ETs, look out for aliens.
It's natural to wonder if Vatican astronomers are particularly interested in the idea of life out there because it would reflect somehow onto their religious tradition or their belief system. And indeed, they're as interested in it as any other astronomers that I meet. But as far as I know, they're not doing any particular projects in that regard. Also, their telescope isn't really well suited as a telescope to doing the kind of exoplanet hunting or life detection that astronomers are doing elsewhere.
Nevertheless, some people claim that the Vatican Observatory's research in detecting asteroids that might be on a collision course with Earth has actually been designed to hide very different, secret investigations. It's a debate that appears set to continue.
Now, let's be honest, it's absolutely bizarre that the Vatican has a telescope at all, let alone one that's pointed in deep space for purposes of identifying incoming life-threatening objects. Why is that their job?
Throughout its history, the Catholic Church has been very heavily involved in science. People don't want to talk about it. The man who invented the Big Bang Theory was a Jesuit priest. There is no inherent contradiction between religion and science. One asks how, the other asks why. So the fact there's a telescope now doesn't mean that they're searching for aliens or they're trying to convert little green people. It just means that they're furthering their scientific work.
Astronomer Father Kikwaya, who leads the Vatican's official research project detecting incoming asteroids, dismisses the idea that he's secretly looking for alien spaceships and says there's no photographic or other evidence that they exist.
You know, if someone say, I saw one in a circle, so did you take a picture of it? And then if you show me the picture and I'm convinced that, that is one, and then I will believe. So until now, people just talk about it, but nobody has taken a real picture of it. So, yeah.
Nevertheless, Father Kikwaya does accept that there is a good chance of life existing on other planets in the universe.
There is truly, a possibility of life beyond, what we know. We don't have any scientific proof yet. But with what we know, with, the size of the universe, with the number of planets we have now in the universe, we say, okay, there is a possibility of life, beyond the Earth. That is the position of the Church as well. There is a possibility of life beyond.
Longtime University of Arizona astronomer Chris Impey agrees.
I've heard what a series of 3 or 4 directors of the Vatican Observatory have said and thought about that. And, they're probably in the same camp and situation as the average astronomer who's aware of the subject. They think it's entirely plausible that there's life in the universe. They think it's even plausible that some of it could be intelligent, rival us, or exceed us in intelligence.
In fact, the Vatican recently hosted a global conference that brought together scholars from all different scientific disciplines to examine the question of whether there might be life beyond our solar system. And I think it's tempting to imagine that as being anathema to a religious philosophy, but in fact, it's not. It's all about how humanity fits into the global plan of the world and the universe, and that is all part of God's plan as far as the Church is concerned.
If, tomorrow we come really to realize that there is a life elsewhere, that is not going to be for us a surprise, but maybe a confirmation that a God truly is more than what we think of him.
We can project that there are 10 or 15 billion habitable worlds, roughly Earth-like, in the Milky Way galaxy. So that's that many places where there could be life. And also, there's been time before the Earth formed, billions of years before the Earth formed, for those planets to have got started with life and the life to have evolved. So it's not ridiculous to hold a view that there's intelligent technological life out there. It's just that astronomers think we haven't encountered it yet, and it hasn't encountered us.
Interestingly, if mainstream astronomers do happen to encounter aliens, there is a plan about what action they should take.
Astronomers actually have a protocol of what you do if intelligent life is found. Who should be told first? Do you try and communicate back if you've received a message? If you find an artifact that you believe to be of alien artifact, what do you do with it? So astronomers have actually had to think about these things. So as for how the Vatican Observatory or the official Vatican Church infrastructure would react to the discovery of life elsewhere, intelligent life, I don't know if they have a protocol. This came up at a conference. The director of the observatory was asked pretty much these questions, and he said, no, we don't have a particular protocol for that.
Hidden deep inside the Vatican's secret archives, could there in fact be a secretive protocol describing how the Catholic Church will react if intelligent aliens are discovered? And incredibly perhaps, also describing what actions the Pope will take if one of the aliens is thought to be the second coming of Jesus.
I do believe the world's a far stranger place than we give it credit for. And the Catholic Church, where there's smoke, there's fire. The Vatican's secret archives contain documents that they don't want the world to know, documents that have been suppressed because they would change the way we think about theology. That's why they call it the secret archives.
Apart from documents that might reveal the Vatican's alleged interest in aliens, the secret archive may well contain the answers to many of the most enduring Vatican controversies and scandals.
I would like to see a whistleblower come forward and tell the truth about the Vatican and the secrets they've been withholding. Then we could properly rewrite history.
Will claims that the Vatican collaborated with the Nazis during World War II be proven or disproven as a result of the early opening of the Vatican's wartime archive? Historians now have their work cut out for them. And what secrets about Vatican corruption and Mafia murders lie waiting to be discovered when Pope John Paul I's archive is finally opened in 2048? Researchers can only hope that his archive is released early and the truth can be told. Though the answers contained within the archives may well be far less sensational than the conspiracies that have grown up around them.